All right, so let's get at it. So the very first thing that we're going to do is to start actually building up the logic that is our squashDeform logic. Add an Apex script node, okay? And the second node of the Apex script nodes we're going to put here. But before we do that, over here on the right, I'm going to turn on this header and I'm going to select component. And all that's doing is it's literally setting up our graph to be used basically to inject this new logic into an existing network. And that's super important. So that if you go look at this, what this has done here, you click on the Apex network view. This is what this code over here, this header and footer, has actually done. And the code that we're about to write is actually going to start creating nodes here that will then ultimately flow into our existing base.rig logic. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the second output, which is the Apex script graph output, and I'm going to put that into the second output of this basically pass through. I'm going to call this my squash logic injection. Okay. All right. Maybe that may be a little too much, but anyway. And then what I'm going to do is say, instead of use snippet, I'm going to say use second input. And that's saying pull everything out of this guy, put it in here, incorporate the rest of that logic into our rest of the graph. And right now, that graph looks like this. All the logic that we have built up by first selecting the FK and then the bone deform is right here. And in fact, if you select each of these, you can go into the visualizing and you can actually highlight, hey, what are the added nodes of this particular selected component or node. And in this particular case, all of them, because we hadn't done anything here. But if I select the bone deform, you can see when I go over here and highlight the added nodes, you can see what nodes that was added when you added this new node to your network. Okay, it's kind of cool. There's a number of debug, and one of the big things that I'm trying to show in this series is all the different ways to debug what's going on as you build up your logic here, and this is just one of many that I'm going to be getting into. All right, so let's get into it. Back up here on the script, I'm going to right click on this snippet, and I'm going to select expressions, and I'm going to say edit in an external editor. Okay, now this is where I'm heavily using Sublime to do this editing. And I had a video that I showed you how I set this all up. Please refer to that because I'm not going to go into that right now. But this is basically my Sublime environment. I've already created a Sublime project in my temp directory where these snippets are generated when you use the external editor inside Houdini. And so now when I type something here and I hit save, I see it go into the snippet. And that's how we're going to drive all of this functionality that we're about to drive. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is I am going to connect those root joints. If we go back and we look at this this node here, which is basically all of the logic. Let me make this a little bigger so you can potentially see this a little better. When you look at the existing graph, you'll note that we've created a number of joints, and inside Apex, these are called transform objects. And you'll see here, like root is a transform object that represents that point that is the bone or the joint that I created called root. Okay, and you'll notice that the hierarchy has been established here. So when I look at the top, you'll notice that the X form coming out of root drives into the parent of top. It also drives into the parent of bottom and the parent of deform. And that's how I set up that skeleton hierarchy, okay? These all flow into the point transform, which is actually modifying the changes to the skeleton, which then go into the bone deform, which changes the geometry. We are going to be manipulating and changing this graph by injecting whatever code we're going to write in this script into this. And the way that we're going to do that is the first thing I'm going to do is I need to find the nodes or the transform objects that make up our joints. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to be adding logic to make so that when I manipulate the top joint, it actually does a squash and stretch, as will the bottom, okay? The way that I need to do that is there's many ways that you can do that in Apex, one of which is, hey, I want to find the node called root, or I'm going to find the node called bottom, and then start to connect those. A better way, and a way that side effects highly recommends, because then this makes the logic that we're going to write more composable, i.e. usable in other rigs with other meshes that are more complicated, etc. We're going to use the tagging mechanism in Apex, okay? And if you remember, I didn't use I haven't put any tags into my rig yet, into my skeleton yet. And so let's do that, because I want to use the tags to find the nodes later on in my logic. The bones that I want to be able to find in order to manipulate is I need to be able to find the deform. I need to be able to find the top and the bottom. And that, I believe, is all I need, okay? Now, I also want to be able to manipulate the root bone via FK, okay? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple nodes to this graph up here. And those couple nodes are going to add an attribute wrangle right to my deform. And what I'm going to do there is I'm going to append a tag. And the way you do that is you say tags, and I'm going to add a special name tag. This could be anything, okay? But this is important in that I'm going to be looking for this tag later on in my logic, okay? I'm going to call this my squashDeform tag, okay? And then on the root, I'm going to grab this. I'm going to put on my root, I'm just going to add the FK, which is forward kinematics on root. And then for top, I'm going to add that. I'm going to put one over here also for bottom. I'm going to put for the top, I'm going to say squashTop. Let's make sure that how you spell this matters. And this one is going to be squashBottom for the bottom tag. Okay. All right. So let's just keep this. So this was the FK tag for root. This one is our squashTop tag. And this one is our squashBottom tag. Okay. What has that done? If I go and I look at right here in this merge and I look at my geometry spreadsheet, you'll notice under tags, you'll notice that my deform bone has got a squashDeform tag to it. The root has an FK tag, and I've already see a problem here. My top should actually have I messed that up somehow. That should be squashTop. Okay. Always good to double check your work. And debug this as much as you can. So there we go. So the deform is squashDeform. My root just has an FK tag on it. The top has a squashTop and the bottom squashBottom. Okay. That becomes important as I move farther down into my network. All right. So how does this become important? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my FK auto rig. And instead of just saying star and all this stuff, the only ones that the ones that I want to be able to translate, i.e. move, are the ones with the FK tag, okay? And then the root object is the only one that I want to be able to rotate and scale, okay? So I need to make one more change up here, because I need to basically say not only squashTop, but I also want you to have FK. So I'm going to actually make this a little bit more simple. And I'm going to say, move this down here. Okay. Which will then add an FK to root, but then it'll also add that to squash and bottom. So let's double check, make sure that worked. So I should have a squashDeform. Actually, okay, let me do this. Let me pull this farther down, put it here. There we go. Now I have FK on all the bones that I actually want to manipulate, and then my special tags on the ones that we're going to feed our logic. Okay? Hope that makes sense. Okay, so this should go down here. All right. So now what this is saying is, hey, any joint or control that has the FK tag, I'm going to be able to translate. any node that is basically called root, I'll be able to rotate and scale. Okay, so what does that look like? If I go into the network view and hit enter, you'll notice that when I select the top, you'll notice I can't rotate and I can't scale it. All I can do is move it, translate it. That's because the T promote group is the only situation there where I've got an FK tag on that. Okay. If I select root, notice I can scale and I can rotate. Okay. So if I hit E there, I'm scaling. Okay. All right. So now back to our script. Now that we have those tags, we're now going to be able to find those bones based on those tags.